This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Gertrude Coppard was a woman of refinement and education. Born into a respectable family, she had always envisioned a life of culture and intellectual pursuits. The crisp winter air nipped at Gertrude's cheeks as she entered the Christmas party, her heart fluttering with anticipation. The room was a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, tinsel glittering in the warm glow of candles, laughter mingling with the soft strains of a piano. It was here, amidst the festive chaos, that her eyes locked with Walter Morels. Walter stood out like a rough-hewn statue among polished marble. His broad shoulders and easy smile drew Gertrude's gaze, igniting a spark of curiosity she couldn't ignore. As he approached, the scent of coal dust and masculinity clung to him, a stark contrast to the refined cologne of the men she usually encountered. "Care for a dance?" Walter's voice was deep and rich, like warm honey over gravel. Gertrude found herself nodding, her carefully constructed walls already beginning to crumble. As they whirled across the floor, the world blurred around them. Walter's strong hands guided her with surprising grace, his vitality infectious. Gertrude's laughter, genuine and unrestrained, bubbled up from a place she'd long forgotten existed. "You're not like the other girls here," Walter murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "And you're certainly not like the other men," Gertrude replied, a hint of challenge in her voice. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments and breathless promises. Gertrude found herself swept up in a passion she'd only read about in novels. Walter's world of coal mines and rough camaraderie was so far removed from her own, yet she found it exhilarating. Each day brought a new adventure, a chance to break free from the constraints of her upbringing. The wedding was a simple affair, nothing like the grand ceremony Gertrude had once imagined. Yet as she stood beside Walter, his calloused hand warm in hers, she felt a surge of hope for their future. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and possibility as they exchanged vows, sealing their fate with a kiss that tasted of new beginnings. But the honeymoon phase faded faster than morning mist in sunlight. The first cracks in their relationship appeared like hairline fractures in fine china, small but impossible to ignore. Walter's charm, once so alluring, began to wear thin as Gertrude discovered the man beneath the facade. Their small house, which had seemed cozy at first, now felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on Gertrude as she watched Walter stumble home night after night, reeking of alcohol and broken promises. His paycheck, meant to build their future, disappeared into pint glasses and betting slips. Arguments erupted like summer storms, hot and sudden. Gertrude's refined words clashed with Walter's coarse language, creating a cacophony that echoed through their once peaceful home. She pleaded with him to change, to be the man she thought she had married. But Walter, trapped in his own cycle of disappointment and escape, lashed out with words sharp as coal shards. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he'd snarl, his eyes clouded with drink and resentment. "Well, this is who I am, love. Take it or leave it." Gertrude found herself increasingly isolated, a delicate orchid struggling to bloom in rocky soil. The mining community, with its rough edges and unspoken rules, was as alien to her as a foreign land. She longed for the intellectual conversations and cultural pursuits of her past life, now as distant as a fading dream. As she walked through the village, Gertrude felt the weight of curious stares. The other women, hardened by years of mining life, regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Their laughter and easy camaraderie only emphasized her loneliness, a stark reminder of how far she had strayed from her roots. The final blow came like a pickaxe to her already fragile trust. Gertrude discovered Walter's deception about their home. Not owned, as he had claimed, but merely rented. The revelation hit her like a cave-in, bearing the last remnants of her faith in him. As she stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on her swelling belly, Gertrude felt the full weight of her predicament. The child growing within her, once a symbol of their love, now felt like shackles binding her to a life she no longer recognized. Tears fell silently, mixing with the cold dust that seemed to permeate everything in this world so far from her own. Gertrude Coppard, once full of hope and ambition, found herself trapped in a loveless marriage, pregnant with their first child, and unable to escape the life she now bitterly regretted choosing. As she gazed out the window at the bleak mining landscape, a fierce determination began to take root in her heart. She may have made a mistake in marrying Walter, but she would not let it define her entire life. With a hand protectively cradling her belly, Gertrude made a silent vow to her unborn child. She would find a way to create a better future, even if it meant facing the hardest challenge of her life. Gertrude's marriage to Walter was crumbling, piece by piece. As it fell apart, she redirected her energy and affection towards her children. The once vibrant love between them had withered like a flower in drought, leaving only thorns of resentment and disappointment. The small mining town seemed to close in around Gertrude, its narrow streets and soot-stained buildings, a constant reminder of the life she had settled for. The air was thick with coal dust, coating everything in a fine black film that mirrored the darkness creeping into her heart. In the span of a few short years, Gertrude gave birth to 4 children: William, Annie, Paul, and Arthur. Each new life seemed to drive another wedge between her and Walter, pushing them further apart. The house, once filled with the warmth of young love, now echoed with the cries of babies and the heavy silence of unspoken words. Gertrude's eyes, once bright with hope for her future with Walter, now shone with a different light when she gazed upon her sons. In William and Paul, she saw her salvation, her escape from the dreary life she had come to despise. They were her blank canvases, untouched by the grime of the mines that clung to Walter's skin and soul. With fierce determination, Gertrude poured herself into her children's education. She would sit for hours at the kitchen table, her patience as endless as the coal seams beneath their feet, teaching them to read. The rough wooden surface, once laden with hearty meals that brought the family together, now bore the weight of books and papers, symbols of the future she envisioned for her children. William, with his quick mind and charming smile, became the apple of Gertrude's eye. She saw in him the promise of a better life, a ticket out of the working-class existence that clung to them like coal dust. His laughter was music to her ears, a melody that drowned out the memory of Walter's drunken shouts. Paul, born small and sickly, became the focus of Gertrude's intense nurturing. She hovered over him like a protective shadow, her love a blanket that sometimes threatened to smother. His sensitive nature mirrored her own, and in his wide, questioning eyes she saw a reflection of her unfulfilled dreams. As Gertrude's devotion to her sons grew, Walter found himself increasingly pushed to the margins of family life. He became a ghost in his own home, drifting from room to room, seeking a connection that seemed forever out of reach. The floorboards creaked under his heavy steps, a mournful sound that echoed the growing distance between him and his family. The children, guided by their mother's subtle influence, began to view their father with a mixture of fear and pity. Gertrude's voice would drop to a whisper when Walter stumbled home, reeking of beer and disappointment. She would usher the children to bed, her movements quick and quiet, like a flock of birds scattering at the approach of a storm. In those moments, the house held its breath, waiting for the thunder of Walter's anger to pass. As the boys grew, so did the chasm between them and their father. Gertrude's words were seeds planted in fertile minds, sprouting dreams that reached far beyond the confines of their mining town. She nurtured these ambitions with the tenderness of a gardener, pruning away any thoughts of following in Walter's footsteps. The once united family had become a house divided. On one side stood Gertrude, flanked by her children, their eyes bright with the promise of education and escape. On the other, Walter stood alone, a man out of place in his own home, watching as his family slipped through his calloused fingers like so much coal dust. As the boys grew, Gertrude's influence shaped their personalities and ambitions, setting the stage for their future struggles with independence and identity. The bonds she forged with her sons were as deep and complex as the mines that surrounded their home, promising both riches and danger in equal measure. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of the children. William, in particular, seemed to flourish under his mother's careful guidance. His quick wit and natural charm drew admiring glances from neighbors and teachers alike. As Gertrude watched her eldest son transform from a boy into a young man, a mix of pride and anxiety swelled in her chest. She could see the spark of ambition burning bright in his eyes, a fire that threatened to carry him far beyond the reaches of their small mining town. Little did she know that William's blossoming potential would soon set in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of their family. William Morel, Gertrude's eldest son, had grown into a striking young man. His boundless ambition and natural charisma drew admirers from all walks of life, setting the stage for a promising future. The Morel household buzzed with excitement as William burst through the door, waving a letter in his hand. "I've got it!" he exclaimed, his eyes shining with triumph. "A position at a prestigious London firm." Gertrude's face lit up, her eyes brimming with pride and hope. For her, William's success wasn't just his own. It was a beacon of possibility for the entire family. She reached out, clasping his hands in hers, feeling the warmth of his achievement spread through her. The day of William's departure arrived, crisp and full of promise. The train station platform hummed with a mixture of excitement and melancholy. Steam billowed around them, the acrid smell mingling with the scent of polished leather and nervous sweat. As the train's whistle pierced the air, Gertrude's heart clenched. She watched her firstborn vanish into the misty horizon, a bitter-sweet cocktail of pride and loss swirling in her chest. London embraced William with open arms. The city's energy pulsed through his veins, driving him to excel in ways he had never imagined. His days became a whirlwind of meetings and presentations, each small victory at work feeling like a step further from his humble beginnings. The clatter of typewriters and the sharp ring of telephones became the soundtrack to his ascent up the social ladder he had once only dreamed of scaling. Soon, William found himself swept up in a world of glittering parties and high society. Crystal chandeliers cast their soft glow over rooms filled with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the heady scent of success. In these opulent settings, William's charm shone brighter than ever, drawing people to him like moths to a flame. It was at one such soirée that William's eyes first locked with Louisa Lily Dennis Westerns. She was a vision in silk and pearls, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes in a summer breeze. The world seemed to slow as she approached, her delicate hand extended in greeting. William was instantly smitten, drawn to her beauty and the allure of the world she represented. Their courtship was a whirlwind, passionate and intense. Stolen kisses in moonlit gardens and whispered promises of forever filled their days. Before long, a diamond ring adorned Louisa's delicate finger, a symbol of their engagement and William's ascent into a new social stratum. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect union, cracks began to form. When William brought Louisa home to meet his family, the contrast between his two worlds became painfully apparent. The cozy warmth of the Morel household felt stifling to Louisa, used to grand ballrooms and manicured lawns. Gertrude's eyes, once warm with pride for her son, now held a coolness as she observed Louisa's frivolous nature. The young woman's idle chatter and preoccupation with appearances grated against the practical, no-nonsense values of the Morel home. As days turned into weeks and months, William found himself increasingly torn. The demands of his professional life and the expectations of his new social circle weighed heavily upon him. Late nights at the office blended into early mornings at social events, leaving little time for rest or reflection. The constant pressure to perform, to impress, to belong, began to take its toll. During a particularly hectic period, William's body finally rebelled against the relentless pace. What started as a persistent cough quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. Feverish and weak, he made the journey home, seeking the comfort of his mother's care. The Morel household transformed into a sick room, with Gertrude tirelessly tending to her ailing son. The air was thick with worry and the pungent smell of medicinal tinctures. William's breaths came in labored gasps, each one a battle against the pneumonia that had taken hold of his lungs. The once vibrant young man now lay pale and still, his dreams of success and social advancement fading with each passing hour. Despite their fervent prayers and round-the-clock care, William's condition continued to deteriorate. In his final moments, surrounded by the love of his family, William slipped away, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. The news of William's death fell like a hammer blow on the Morel family, shattering their hopes and dreams. For Gertrude, it was as if a part of her own soul had been torn away. The light that had once shone so brightly in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a deep, abiding sorrow. As the family grappled with their loss, a subtle shift occurred. Gertrude's gaze, once fixed so firmly on her eldest, now turned to Paul, her second son. In him, she saw a new vessel for her dreams and ambitions, a chance to reclaim the future that had been so cruelly snatched away. The air in the Morel household grew thick with unspoken expectations. Paul felt the weight of his mother's gaze upon him, heavy with hope and desperation. As he stood by William's empty bed, his fingers tracing the outline of his brother's photograph, a chill ran down his spine. Would he be strong enough to carry the burden of his mother's dreams? Or would he, too, be crushed under the weight of expectations that had claimed his brother's life? The death of William Morel cast a long shadow over the family. In its wake, Paul, the younger son, became the focal point of his mother Gertrude's attention and hopes. The Morel household, once filled with William's boisterous laughter, now echoed with a heavy silence. Paul, a quiet boy with large dark eyes that seemed to absorb the world around him, moved through the rooms like a ghost. His father, baffled by his youngest son's introspective nature, often watched him with a mixture of confusion and frustration. But Gertrude saw something special in Paul. She noticed the way his nimble fingers would trace the outlines of objects, the way his eyes would light up at the sight of a beautiful sunset. It was as if he saw the world differently, and she was determined to nurture that spark of creativity she recognized in him. As Paul grew, so did his talent for art. The gritty beauty of their mining town became his first subject. He'd sit for hours, perched on a hillside overlooking the smoke-belching collieries, his pencil flying across the page. The stark contrast between the industrial landscape and the rolling countryside beyond fascinated him, and he strove to capture it all. "You've got a gift, my boy," Gertrude would say, her voice warm with pride as she examined his latest drawing. Paul would flush with pleasure, drinking in his mother's praise like a flower turning towards the sun. The mining town, with its narrow streets and soot-stained buildings, became Paul's muse. He sketched the weathered faces of miners trudging home after a long shift, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. He captured the quiet dignity of women hanging out washing, their hands raw from scrubbing coal dust from clothes. Each drawing was a story, a moment frozen in time. But it was in portraiture that Paul truly excelled. His family became his unwitting models, their personalities shining through in every line and shadow. He drew his father's craggy face, etched with years of hard labor and harder drinking. He sketched his mother's gentle eyes, filled with dreams of a better life. And he captured his siblings in moments of unguarded laughter, preserving their youth on paper. As word of Paul's talent spread, he began entering local art competitions. The day he won his first prize, a small sum of money and a certificate, was a turning point. Gertrude's eyes shone with tears of joy as she hugged her son, whispering, "I always knew you were special, Paul. You'll go far. You will." The recognition fueled Paul's ambition like nothing else could. He threw himself into his art with renewed vigor, pushing himself to improve with every stroke of his pencil or brush. His room became a sanctuary, filled with the smell of turpentine and the rustle of paper as he worked late into the night. But as Paul's artistic sensibility grew, so did his awareness of the tensions in his home. The arguments between his parents, once background noise, now seemed to vibrate through the very walls. He found himself studying his mother's face, noting the lines of worry that appeared when his father stumbled home, drunk yet again. To escape the suffocating atmosphere, Paul began to venture further afield in search of inspiration. He'd pack a small bag with supplies and disappear for hours, returning with sketchbooks full of sun-dappled forests and babbling brooks. Nature became his refuge, a place where the ugliness of the mining town faded away. As he sat by a stream, capturing the play of light on water, Paul could almost forget the arguments that echoed through their house at night. In these moments, brush in hand and canvas before him, he felt truly free. The gentle gurgle of the water, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the earthy scent of the forest floor grounded him, allowing his creativity to soar. With each painting, Paul's style evolved, becoming more confident and unique. He experimented with color and form, pushing beyond mere representation to capture the essence of his subjects. His landscapes began to take on a dreamlike quality, infused with the longing he felt for a world beyond the confines of his hometown. As Paul's art flourished, so did his dreams. He began to imagine a life away from the coal dust and poverty, a life filled with beauty and culture. In his mind's eye, he saw himself in Paris or London, rubbing shoulders with great artists and thinkers. These dreams both excited and terrified him, a bridge between the world he knew and the refined existence he yearned for. But with these dreams came guilt. Paul knew that to pursue them would mean leaving behind everything and everyone he loved. Most of all, his art had become a mirror for his mother's own unfulfilled desires. In every stroke of his brush, in every prize he won, Gertrude saw the promise of a better life, not just for Paul, but for herself as well. As Paul stood before his latest canvas, a swirling depiction of the countryside beyond the mining town, he felt a mix of pride and restlessness. His art had become more than just a hobby. It was a bridge to another world, a world of possibilities that both thrilled and frightened him. With each brushstroke, he was not just creating beauty, he was painting his way towards a future that seemed both tantalizingly close and impossibly far away. The weight of his mother's hopes and his own dreams pressed down on him, as heavy as the coal dust that settled on everything in their town. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his canvas, Paul felt a strange stirring in his heart. Little did he know that his life was about to change dramatically. In the fading light, he could almost see the outline of a figure approaching from the neighboring farm, a figure that would soon become central to his world. Paul Morell's life was about to change dramatically. He formed a deep friendship with Miriam Livers, the daughter of a neighboring farming family. The first time Paul met Miriam, he was struck by her thoughtful demeanor. Her eyes, deep and soulful, seemed to hold secrets of the universe. When she spoke, her voice was soft yet passionate, like a gentle breeze carrying the weight of profound thoughts. On a warm summer afternoon, they sat beneath an old oak tree, its leaves rustling softly above them. The air was thick with the sweet scent of wildflowers, and bees hummed lazily nearby. Miriam's fingers traced the lines of a poetry book as she read aloud, her words painting vivid pictures in Paul's mind. "Listen to this, Paul," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Isn't it beautiful?" Paul nodded, mesmerized not just by the words, but by the way Miriam's face lit up as she read them. He felt a strange stirring in his chest, a mixture of admiration and something deeper he couldn't quite name. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. The crisp autumn air carried with it a sense of possibility, and Paul found himself spending more and more time at the Livers farm. Miriam would lead him through the fields, now a patchwork of gold and red, pointing out the beauty in the smallest details, a dewdrop on a spider's web, the intricate pattern of veins on a fallen leaf. "Look, Paul," she'd say, her breath visible in the cool air. "Isn't it amazing how even in decay, there's such beauty?" Her wonder was contagious, and Paul found himself seeing the world through new eyes. He'd pull out his sketchbook, trying to capture not just the physical beauty of the farm, but the essence of the peace he felt there. Miriam would watch him draw, her presence a comforting silence that allowed his creativity to flow freely. As winter settled in, Paul and Miriam's connection deepened. They'd spend long evenings by the fire, discussing philosophy and dreams for the future. Miriam's faith in Paul was unwavering, her belief in his talent fierce and absolute. "You're going to be great someday, Paul," she'd say, her eyes shining with conviction. "I just know it." But as their emotional intimacy grew, Paul found himself grappling with conflicting feelings. His heart raced when Miriam was near, but when it came to physical attraction, he felt a strange reluctance. It was like a wall he couldn't quite scale, no matter how much he cared for her. This internal struggle didn't go unnoticed. Tension simmered in both households, bubbling to the surface in hushed conversations and worried glances. Paul's mother, Gertrude, watched the growing closeness between her son and Miriam with a mixture of concern and jealousy. Her lips would tighten whenever Miriam's name was mentioned, her knuckles white as she gripped her teacup a little too tightly. Paul found himself caught in an emotional tug-of-war. On one side was Miriam, with her deep understanding and unwavering support. On the other was his own confusion, the guilt over his lack of physical desire, warring with the strength of their mental connection. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. As they grew older, the pressure to define their relationship mounted. Friends and family began to ask questions, their curious glances and pointed remarks adding weight to an already complex situation. Paul, feeling overwhelmed, began to withdraw at times. He'd cancel plans last minute or be distant during their meetings, leaving Miriam confused and hurt. Miriam, for her part, tried to hide her pain. She'd force a smile, telling herself that Paul just needed time, that their connection was strong enough to weather any storm. But in the quiet moments, when she was alone with her thoughts, doubt would creep in like a cold mist, chilling her to the bone. One crisp spring morning, as Paul walked home from the Livers farm, his mind was a tumult of emotions. The weight of his conflicted feelings for Miriam pressed down on him, making each step feel heavy and uncertain. As he crested the hill overlooking his village, a sudden realization struck him. He needed to make a change, to find a path forward that didn't leave him torn between love and uncertainty. With a mixture of fear and determination, Paul made a decision. He would seek out a job in the city, a chance to spread his wings and perhaps gain some clarity. As he quickened his pace towards home, his heart raced with anticipation. Little did he know that tomorrow would bring an opportunity that would alter the course of his life forever. Paul Morell's heart raced as he stepped into Jordan's, a surgical appliance factory in Nottingham. With a mix of nervousness and determination, he was about to secure a job that would change the course of his life. The factory's cacophony engulfed him, a symphony of clanging metal, whirring machines, and urgent voices. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of leather and the metallic tang of steel, a pungent reminder of the world he was entering. Paul's fingers twitched, itching to prove themselves as he navigated the maze of workbenches and bustling employees. As days melted into weeks, Paul found his footing in this new realm. His artistic eye, once confined to canvas and paint, now breathed life into sketches of artificial limbs. Each line he drew was a testament to his growing skill, marrying function with an elegance that caught his employer's attention. The rhythmic pulse of the factory became the heartbeat of his days, a constant companion to his evolving craft. But as darkness fell and the factory gates closed behind him, Paul's true self emerged. Night after night, he hunched over his easel, the warm glow of a single lamp casting dramatic shadows across his determined face. The scratch of brush on canvas filled the silence, each stroke a defiant act against the encroaching fatigue. Here, in the solitude of his room, Paul's passion blazed, refusing to be dimmed by the demands of his day job. It was during one of these long, grueling days at Jordan's that fate intervened. Clara Dawes entered Paul's life like a gust of fresh air in the stuffy factory. She worked in the spiral department, her movements a fluid dance amidst the rigid machinery. Unlike the other workers who seemed to blend into the clinical surroundings, Clara stood out, her presence magnetic and undeniable. Paul found himself drawn to her, captivated by the worldliness she exuded. Clara was no ethereal creature like Miriam. She was flesh and blood, grounded in reality. The absence of a wedding ring on her finger spoke volumes, hinting at a life lived and choices made. Her independence radiated from her like a beacon, calling to something deep within Paul. Their lunch breaks became an oasis in the desert of monotony. Clara's words painted vivid pictures of a world beyond the factory walls, of socialist rallies and suffragette marches. Her eyes sparkled with passion as she spoke, igniting a curiosity in Paul that went far beyond mere physical attraction. Each shared moment felt like a step towards something greater, something yet undefined but thrillingly possible. As their friendship deepened, Paul began to see Clara as more than just a co-worker. She represented freedom, a tantalizing glimpse of a life unencumbered by the emotional labyrinth of his relationship with Miriam or the suffocating embrace of his mother's love. The air between them crackled with unspoken potential, each lingering glance a silent promise of what could be. Meanwhile, Paul's artistic fire continued to burn bright. His paintings, infused with raw emotion and keen observation, began to catch the eye of Nottingham's art circles. Whispers of his name floated through galleries and studios, fanning the flames of his ambition. The factory, once a stepping stone, now felt increasingly like a cage, its walls closing in as his dreams expanded beyond its confines. As Paul stood at this crossroads, torn between duty and desire, a thrill of anticipation coursed through him. The world was opening up, full of promise and potential. Yet as he prepared to seize these new opportunities with both hands, a nagging thought tugged at the back of his mind. Miriam's face floated before him, her eyes filled with an expectation he wasn't sure he could meet. The conflicting emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over, threatening to pull him under. Paul found himself standing on the precipice of a decision that would shape not just his future, but the lives of those closest to him. Paul Morell's relationship with Miriam Levers intensified with each passing day. However, as their connection deepened, he found himself increasingly torn by conflicting emotions. The crisp autumn air nipped at Paul's cheeks as he walked beside Miriam through the woods near her family's farm. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, releasing a musty scent that mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from literature to philosophy and shared dreams. Miriam's eyes sparkled with admiration as she listened to Paul's passionate opinions, her heart swelling with love for this complex young man. "What do you think about Hardy's use of fate in Tess?" Miriam asked, her voice soft and eager. Paul's brow furrowed as he considered the question. "It's brilliant, really. The way he weaves it through the story, making it feel both inevitable and cruel." As they talked, Paul felt a familiar unease creeping in. Miriam's hand brushed against his and he tensed. The warmth of her touch should have ignited desire, but instead it left him cold. Guilt gnawed at him, his mind racing to reconcile the disconnect between his emotional attachment and his lack of physical attraction. Miriam, ever patient and devoted, sensed Paul's inner turmoil. She longed to bridge the gap between them, to feel the full force of his love. But she waited, her own desires simmering beneath a veneer of quiet acceptance. The tension between them stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap at any moment. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Paul steeled himself for intimacy. Determined to overcome his reservations, he led Miriam to a secluded spot in the woods. The air was thick with anticipation, the chirping of crickets a steady backdrop to their nervous breathing. They consummated their relationship, but the act felt mechanical and devoid of passion. Paul moved through the motions, his mind detached from his body, as if fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing love. The rustling of leaves and the distant call of a nightbird seemed to mock their fumbling attempts at connection. In the aftermath, they lay side by side on a bed of fallen leaves, the silence between them heavy with unspoken disappointment. Miriam's eyes glistened with unshed tears while Paul stared at the darkening sky, a knot of confusion tightening in his chest. The physical encounter, far from resolving their issues, had only deepened the chasm between them. As Paul grappled with his conflicted feelings for Miriam, another figure began to occupy his thoughts. Clara Dawes, with her self-assured demeanor and worldly experience, drew Paul like a moth to a flame. Unlike the ethereal Miriam, Clara exuded a raw sensuality that awakened something primal in him. Their encounters, though initially casual, crackled with unspoken tension. At the factory where they both worked, Paul found himself seeking out Clara's company, drawn to her quick wit and mature outlook. The clatter of machinery provided a constant backdrop to their charged conversations, each word laden with hidden meaning. "You seem distracted today, Paul," Clara observed one afternoon, her eyes searching his face. "Is everything all right?" Paul's heart raced at her concern. "Just thinking about life, I suppose, the choices we make." In Clara's presence, he felt a stirring of desire that had eluded him with Miriam. The contrast between the two women was stark. Miriam, the embodiment of spiritual love, and Clara, a temptress of earthly pleasures. Paul's growing attraction to Clara added another layer of complexity to his already tumultuous emotional landscape. He felt like a man caught in a storm, buffeted by conflicting winds of loyalty, desire, and guilt. His indecision cast a shadow over both relationships, causing pain not only to Miriam and Clara, but also to himself. The factory walls seemed to close in on him, mirroring the suffocating weight of his choices. As if his romantic entanglements weren't complicated enough, Paul's relationship with his mother, Gertrude, loomed large over every decision he made. Her love, both nurturing and suffocating, had shaped him from childhood. Now, as a young man trying to forge his own path, Paul found himself constantly pulled back into her orbit. Gertrude's influence was like an invisible thread, tugging at Paul's heart whenever he tried to form a deep connection with another woman. Her expectations weighed heavily on him, making it nearly impossible to commit fully to either Miriam or Clara. "You seem troubled, my boy," Gertrude said one evening as Paul sat brooding by the fireplace. "Is it work? Or is it a girl?" Paul's heart clenched at his mother's perceptiveness. "It's nothing, Mother. Just growing pains, I suppose." In quiet moments, Paul would sit by his window, watching the play of light and shadow on the street below. He felt like those shadows, shifting, uncertain, never fully belonging to one place or person. The struggle within him raged on, a tempest of emotions that threatened to tear him apart. As the days grew shorter and winter approached, Paul found himself no closer to resolving his inner conflict. He remained caught in a web of his own making, unable to fully commit to either Miriam or Clara, always feeling the pull of his mother's influence. The emotional triangle he had created continued to cause pain and confusion, not only for the women in his life, but for Paul himself, as he grappled with the complexities of love, desire, and the search for his own identity. One chilly evening, as Paul walked home from the factory, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, he made a sudden, impulsive decision. His feet carried him not towards home, nor to Miriam's farm, but in a different direction entirely. His heart pounded as he approached Clara's house, his hand raised to knock on the door. In that moment, standing on the threshold, Paul knew his life was about to change irrevocably. Paul Morell's life took an unexpected turn. He embarked on a passionate affair with Clara Dawes, a relationship that would finally provide him with the physical and emotional connection he had been yearning for. The first clandestine meeting set Paul's heart racing like a runaway train. Clara's presence was intoxicating, her eyes holding depths of experience that both intimidated and thrilled him. As they strolled through a sun-dappled meadow, the tall grass whispering against their legs, Paul felt sparks of electricity with each accidental brush of their hands. Their rendezvous grew more frequent and intense. The countryside became their playground, offering secluded spots for stolen moments. Rolling hills and ancient forests bore witness to their blossoming romance. At the seaside, with salty air whipping around them and waves crashing in a thunderous symphony, they shared kisses that left Paul dizzy and breathless. Clara, older and more worldly, ushered Paul into a new realm of physical intimacy. Her touch ignited sensations he never knew existed, like fireworks exploding beneath his skin. In her arms, Paul felt truly alive for the first time. He reveled in the way their bodies moved together, a perfect harmony of desire and fulfillment. But as the initial rush began to settle, complications surfaced like jagged rocks in a smooth stream. Clara's estranged marriage cast a long, dark shadow over their relationship. Paul found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. The secrecy that had once been thrilling now felt like a noose slowly tightening around his neck. Meanwhile, Paul's friendship with Miriam began to fray. Though he tried to maintain their connection, Miriam sensed the change in him. Her sad, knowing looks pierced Paul's heart with guilt. He felt torn between the physical passion he shared with Clara and the deep spiritual bond he had with Miriam, like a man trying to keep one foot on each side of a widening chasm. The situation came to a head one rainy afternoon. The sky wept, mirroring Paul's inner turmoil as he encountered Baxter Dawes, Clara's husband. The two men faced each other like storm clouds about to clash, tension crackling in the air. Their heated words rose above the patter of raindrops. Suddenly, Baxter lunged forward, his fist connecting with Paul's jaw with a sickening crack. The fight was brief but brutal, leaving both men battered and Paul's pride severely bruised. As weeks passed, Paul's inner conflict grew like a thorny vine around his heart. Clara fulfilled his physical needs in ways he had never imagined, but something vital was missing. Their conversations, once vibrant and engaging, now felt hollow at times, like an empty echo chamber. Throughout it all, Paul's mother remained a constant presence in his mind, her influence an invisible thread tugging at his conscience. He found himself comparing every woman to her, and none seemed to measure up to the impossible standard she set. The weight of his divided loyalties began to take its toll. Paul felt like a boat caught between opposing currents, unable to chart a clear course. The passion that had once burned so brightly between him and Clara started to flicker and fade, like a candle struggling against a strong wind. As autumn leaves began to fall, mirroring the decline of their affair, Paul stood at a crossroads. The intensity of his relationship with Clara had opened his eyes to new possibilities, but it had also forced him to confront the complex landscape of his own heart. He realized that the journey to find true love and his place in the world was far from over. The affair with Clara, while transformative, was just one chapter in his ongoing story of self-discovery. Just as Paul was grappling with these tumultuous emotions, a shadow fell across his world. News reached him that his father, Walter Morel, had taken a turn for the worse. The once robust miner now lay bedridden, his body finally surrendering to the relentless toll of his years in the mines. As Paul rushed to his father's side, he couldn't help but wonder, would this be the final blow that would shatter his already fragile world? Walter Morel's body finally surrendered to the relentless toll of his years in the mines. The once robust miner now lay bedridden, his lungs waging a losing battle against the coal dust that had become his constant companion. The Morel household, a place once filled with the cacophony of family life, fell into an eerie silence. The absence of Walter's thunderous footsteps and booming voice left a void that seemed to swallow the very air around them. In this newfound quiet, Paul found himself drawn back into the orbit of family duty, his feet carrying him reluctantly towards his father's sick room. The floorboards creaked under Paul's hesitant steps, each sound amplified in the hushed atmosphere. As he pushed open the door, the sharp smell of illness and disinfectant assaulted his senses. There, in the dim light filtering through heavy curtains, lay Walter, a shadow of his former self. Paul's breath caught in his throat. The sight of his father, pale and gasping, sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't the towering figure of his childhood memories, but a man diminished, fighting for each ragged breath. Paul's artist's hands, more accustomed to the delicate touch of brush on canvas, now fumbled with the unfamiliar tasks of caretaking. Days blended into nights, marked only by the rhythmic wheezing of Walter's labored breathing. Paul found his initial reluctance giving way to a growing compassion. In the quiet moments between doses of medicine and changes of bedding, he found himself studying his father's face. The lines etched by years of hard labor told a story Paul had never bothered to read before. The calloused hands that had once seemed threatening now appeared vulnerable, their strength sapped by illness. Gertrude moved through the sick room like a ghost, her efficiency born of long practice. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Paul caught glimpses of tenderness between his parents, a gentle touch, a shared look, that spoke of a history deeper than the resentments he had known. It was as if the illness had stripped away years of bitterness, revealing a foundation of care that had been buried beneath. The house became a revolving door of family members, each drawn back by the gravity of Walter's condition. Annie and Arthur joined Paul in a rotation of care, their shared concern creating a bridge between siblings who had grown apart. In hushed conversations over steaming cups of tea, they rediscovered the bonds of childhood, strengthened now by adult understanding. Walter, stripped of his usual bravado, revealed a gentler side. His voice, when he could muster it, carried notes of gratitude that Paul had never heard before. "Thank you, lad," he'd whisper, his eyes conveying more than his words could express. These moments, fragile as morning mist, left Paul grappling with a new image of his father. As Walter's strength slowly returned, the family dynamics shifted like sand underfoot. The temporary truce brought about by crisis began to solidify into something more lasting. Laughter, once a rarity in the Morel home, began to bubble up more frequently. Even Walter, between bouts of coughing, would crack jokes about his fancy new wheeze, his eyes twinkling with a humor Paul had forgotten existed. Paul found himself lingering in the house more often, his artistic pursuits temporarily set aside. He watched his mother and father navigate their new reality, noting the small kindnesses that passed between them. It was as if he was seeing their relationship through a new lens, one that revealed the complex interplay of love, duty, and shared history. The experience left Paul with a more nuanced understanding of love and commitment. He saw how years of hardship could wear away at affection, but also how crisis could reveal the bedrock of deep connection. His own heart, once so certain in his judgments, now felt the stirring of doubt in a new, more compassionate wisdom. As Walter slowly recovered, the family found themselves in unfamiliar territory. The atmosphere in the Morel household, once charged with tension, now held a fragile harmony. It was as if they were all learning a new dance, stepping carefully around each other, afraid to break the spell of peace that had descended. Paul, standing at the threshold of adulthood, felt the weight of this new understanding settle on his shoulders. He looked at his father, still weak but improving day by day, and saw not just the minor or the difficult husband, but a man, complex, flawed, and worthy of compassion. This realization, as much as any artistic epiphany, marked a turning point in Paul's journey toward maturity. As the sun set on another day of care and reconciliation, Paul found himself alone in the kitchen, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The newfound peace in his family home stood in stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, his world expanding and contracting all at once. With a start, he realized that his father's illness had not just changed Walter, it had irrevocably altered Paul himself. As he stared out into the gathering darkness, a sense of impending change washed over him. What would this new understanding mean for his relationships, his art, his very sense of self? Paul Morel stood at the precipice of emotional upheaval, his life teetering on the brink of transformation. Paul Morel stood at the precipice of emotional upheaval, his life teetered on the brink of transformation, as he grappled with the complexities of his various relationships. The weight of his long, tangled history with Miriam Levers pressed down on him like a sodden wool coat. As he sat across from her in the dimly lit parlor of her family's farm, the air hung thick with unspoken words and the musty scent of old furniture. Paul's heart hammered against his ribs, his palms slick with sweat as he fumbled for the right words. "Miriam," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, cracking slightly. "I can't give you what you deserve. I'm sorry." The words fell between them like heavy stones, shattering the fragile silence. Miriam's face, always so open and earnest, crumpled in pain. Tears welled in her eyes, glistening in the flickering lamplight, but she held them back with fierce determination. Paul felt a mixture of relief and guilt wash over him, as if he'd just set down a heavy burden, only to realize he'd crushed something delicate in the process. As he walked home that evening, the cool night air nipped at his cheeks, seeming to clear his head. The stars above twinkled indifferently, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, reminding him of how small his troubles were in the grand scheme of things. Yet the ache in his chest persisted, a dull throb that spoke of endings and new beginnings. Paul's affair with Clara Dawes burned on, a passionate flame that flickered bright but unstable. They met in secret, stolen moments of intimacy that left Paul both exhilarated and unsettled. Clara's touch was electric, her kisses intoxicating, but something always held him back from fully surrendering to the relationship. It was during one of their clandestine meetings, as they lay tangled in cheap cotton sheets in a small rented room, that Paul began to understand the true nature of his hesitation. The peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards seemed to mirror the fragility of their connection. Clara's fingers traced lazy patterns on his chest, and her voice was soft as she asked, "What are you thinking about, Paul?" He stared at the water-stained ceiling, the answer rising unbidden to his lips. "My mother," he admitted, the words tasting strange in his mouth. Clara's hand stilled, and Paul could feel her pulling away, not just physically, but emotionally. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His emotional attachment to his mother was an invisible barrier, keeping him from fully committing to any woman. As the days passed, Paul noticed Clara withdrawing more and more. Their passionate encounters became less frequent, replaced by long silences and meaningful glances. The air between them grew heavy with unspoken words and unfulfilled promises. He wasn't surprised when she told him she was reconciling with her estranged husband, Baxter Dawes. The news felt like a door closing, but Paul couldn't bring himself to fight for her to stay. Amidst the turmoil of his personal life, Paul's artistic career flourished like a flower pushing through concrete. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the sweep of a brush across canvas, the play of light and shadow. The smell of oil paints and turpentine became his constant companions, more comforting than any lover's embrace. When news came that he had won a prestigious art prize, Paul felt a surge of pride and validation. The award ceremony was a glittering affair, so different from the world he'd grown up in. The champagne flowed freely, and the air buzzed with the chatter of the artistic elite. As he stood on the stage accepting the accolade, Paul caught sight of his mother in the audience. Her face beamed with pride, but there was something else there too, a flicker of fear perhaps, or loss. In that moment, the distance between his working-class roots and his artistic aspirations yawned wide, a chasm he wasn't sure how to bridge. Back home, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of his childhood, Paul felt like a stranger in his own skin. The walls of the small house seemed to close in on him, suffocating his dreams and ambitions. The constant tick of the old clock on the mantel marked the passage of time, each second pulling him further from the world he'd glimpsed at the award ceremony. His mother's loving gaze, once a source of comfort, now felt like a chain around his neck. Guilt gnawed at him. Guilt over his failed relationships. Guilt over his desire to break free from the expectations placed upon him. He wandered the streets of his hometown, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. The coal-dusted faces of the miners, once so familiar, now seemed to belong to a different world entirely. The acrid smell of the mines clung to everything, a constant reminder of the life he was trying to leave behind. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Paul found himself standing at the edge of town. The road stretched out before him, an invitation and a challenge. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the boundaries of his current life. In that moment, as twilight deepened into night, Paul began to recognize the need to break free from the psychological bonds that had shaped his life thus far. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and the potential for more heartache. But as he turned to walk back home, there was a new lightness in his step, a glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. As Paul approached his house, he noticed something was amiss. The lights were on, but there was an eerie stillness in the air. His heart began to race as he quickened his pace. Just as he reached for the doorknob, he heard a muffled sob from inside. Paul froze, his hand trembling. Something was terribly wrong, and he knew in that instant that his world was about to change forever. The devastating news arrived like a thunderbolt, shattering the Morell family's world. Gertrude Morell had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, marking the beginning of a painful decline that would change their lives forever. Paul, the youngest son, felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. His mother, once a pillar of strength, was now slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The family home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with hushed whispers and the faint, sickly scent of medicine. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Paul took on the role of primary caregiver. His own dreams and aspirations faded into the background, like watercolors left out in the rain. Days blurred into nights as he tended to his mother's every need, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Annie and Arthur, Paul's siblings, helped when they could, but it was Paul who bore the brunt of their mother's care. He moved through the house like a ghost, his footsteps quiet on the creaking floorboards, always alert for any sign of distress from Gertrude's room. In the quiet moments between doses of medication and fitful naps, Paul and Gertrude's bond deepened. They spoke of memories, dreams, and regrets, their words hanging in the air like delicate cobwebs. Gertrude's eyes, once bright with life, now held a different kind of light, a mixture of love, fear, and acceptance. "Remember the time we went to the seaside, Paul?" Gertrude would say, her voice thin and reedy. "The way the sun glinted off the waves." Paul would nod, fighting back tears. "I remember, Mother. We'll go again, when you're better." But they both knew it was a lie. As Gertrude's condition worsened, Paul found himself caught in a storm of emotions. Anger surged through him like wildfire, raging against the unfairness of it all. Why his mother? Why now? These questions echoed in his mind, unanswered and relentless. Sadness followed, a deep aching sorrow that seemed to hollow out his very being. Gertrude, ever the mother, sensed Paul's turmoil. Even as her body failed her, her spirit remained strong. She spoke to him of the future, of his art, of finding happiness. Her words were like seeds planted in barren soil, struggling to take root in Paul's grief-stricken heart. "Promise me, Paul," she'd whisper, her voice as fragile as autumn leaves. "Promise me you'll live. Really live." Paul would nod, tears threatening to spill, unable to imagine a world without her guiding presence. The days grew shorter, and Gertrude's pain intensified. Paul watched helplessly as his mother, once so strong and vital, withered like a flower in winter. Her cries of agony pierced the night, each one a dagger in Paul's heart. In those final agonizing days, Paul faced an impossible choice. Gertrude's suffering had become unbearable, a relentless torment that no amount of love or care could ease. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with both love and sorrow, Paul made a decision that would haunt him forever. In the stillness of a gray dawn, Paul administered an overdose of morphine to his beloved mother. The act was born of mercy, a final gift of peace to the woman who had given him life. As Gertrude's breathing slowed and her pain finally eased, Paul felt a complex mix of relief and devastation wash over him. Gertrude Morel passed away quietly, her face serene in death as it had rarely been in those final weeks of life. Paul sat by her side holding her hand, feeling the warmth slowly fade. In that moment, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Paul realized that a chapter of his life had closed. The world outside continued to turn, oblivious to the profound loss that had just occurred within those four walls. As he looked at his mother's peaceful face, Paul felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that her suffering had ended, and a crushing sense of loss that threatened to overwhelm him. The journey ahead seemed impossibly long and lonely, but somewhere in the depths of his grief, Paul knew he would have to find the strength to honor his mother's final wish, to live and to live fully. But as the reality of Gertrude's absence began to sink in, Paul felt a darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. The world seemed to tilt and spin, and he wondered if he could truly go on without her. As he stumbled from the room, his mother's last words echoing in his ears, Paul felt himself teetering on the brink of an abyss, unsure if he had the strength to step back from the edge. Gertrude's death tore a gaping void in Paul Morel's life. The loss of his mother plunged him into a deep, all-consuming depression that threatened to swallow him whole. Days melted into weeks, each one indistinguishable from the last. Paul drifted through the house like a ghost, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness left by his mother's absence. The vibrant colors that once filled his world faded to a dull, lifeless gray. His paintbrushes, once extensions of his very soul, lay abandoned in a corner, gathering dust like forgotten memories. The concerned voices of friends and family reached him as if through a thick fog, muffled and distant. He couldn't bring himself to respond, trapped in a bubble of grief that seemed impenetrable. His father's worried glances bounced off him like raindrops on a window pane, unable to penetrate the shell of sorrow he'd built around himself. As spring breathed new life into the world outside, Paul felt only the icy grip of winter in his heart. He took to wandering the countryside, his feet carrying him over rolling hills and through quiet valleys. The beauty that once inspired his art now felt like a cruel joke. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze, their cheerful faces a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. During these solitary walks, dark thoughts crept in like shadows at dusk. What was the point of it all, he wondered, if everything he loved could be snatched away in an instant? The idea of joining his mother in eternal sleep whispered seductively, promising an end to the relentless ache that consumed him. It was on one such gloomy afternoon that fate intervened. Paul's aimless wandering brought him face to face with Baxter Dawes, Clara's husband. The two men stood frozen, years of resentment and rivalry hanging between them like a tangible force, thick enough to cut with a knife. But something had shifted. The shared experience of loss, Paul's mother, Baxter's marriage, created an unexpected bridge. Words halting at first like a rusty machine, sputtering to life, then flowing more freely, passed between them. As they talked, Paul felt a tiny crack in the wall of his grief, a pinprick of light piercing the darkness that had enveloped him. This chance encounter stirred something in Paul's dormant soul. He began to see his pain not as an endpoint, but as a crucible from which he could emerge transformed. Slowly, tentatively, he picked up his brushes again. Each stroke was an act of defiance against the despair that had threatened to consume him, a declaration that he was still alive. Paul poured his grief onto the canvas, creating raw, powerful works that pulsed with emotion. The act of creation became a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink of oblivion. As he painted, he could almost hear his mother's voice urging him on, reminding him of the talent she had always seen in him, even when he doubted himself. With each completed painting, Paul felt a little more of himself returning. The fog of depression began to lift, revealing a changed landscape both within and without. He realized that to truly honor his mother's memory, he needed to embrace life with the same fierce determination she had shown throughout her own. This awakening brought with it a difficult truth. Paul needed to leave. The town that had nurtured him now felt suffocating. Every street corner and familiar face a reminder of what he had lost. To grow, to become the man his mother had always believed he could be, he had to break free from the cocoon of his past. Saying goodbye was no easy task. Paul's father, gruff and uncertain, clasped his son's hand with surprising strength, his calloused fingers betraying a tenderness rarely shown. His siblings, a mix of pride and worry in their eyes, hugged him tightly, their embraces speaking volumes where words failed. But it was Miriam who proved the hardest farewell. They met in the orchard where they had spent so many hours together, the air heavy with the sweet scent of apple blossoms. A gentle rain of white petals fell around them, nature's own bittersweet confetti for their parting. Miriam's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as Paul spoke of his plans to leave. "I'll always care for you, Miriam," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we both know our paths are diverging." She nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I think I've always known that deep down." "Go and find your way, Paul. Just promise you won't forget us entirely." With a final, bittersweet embrace, they parted. Paul felt the weight of their complicated history lifting from his shoulders, replaced by a tentative hope for the future, fragile but growing stronger with each passing moment. The morning of his departure dawned clear and bright, the sky a canvas of soft pinks and golds. Paul stood at the edge of town, his paint box in one hand, a small suitcase in the other. The city beckoned, a world of possibilities stretching out before him like an unfinished painting. As he took his first steps towards this new life, Paul felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation coursing through his veins, his heart pounding a rhythm of anticipation. With each step, the familiar landscape of his childhood receded, growing smaller in the distance like a fading dream. Paul's heart raced with the thrill of the unknown, a sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. The weight of his past, which had threatened to crush him, now felt like a foundation from which he could build something new and beautiful. As he walked towards his future, Paul felt the promise of self-discovery unfurling within him, as delicate and full of potential as a flower bud on the brink of blooming. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, he felt truly alive. With his mother's memory as a guiding light and his art as his compass, Paul Morell stepped into the world, ready to paint his own destiny on the vast canvas of life.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.